A powerful millionaire's life turns upside down when he sees a little girl alone in the snow, holding a baby. What he does next is shocking, and will make you question what truly matters. Don't miss a second of this unbelievable story. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss resilience, and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. Arthur Sinclair was a man who made time obey him. In the frigid grip of a Chicago winter, his days unfolded like clockwork, each second accounted for in a schedule worth millions. He could stand at the window of his penthouse overlooking the magnificent Mile and feel untouchable safe inside a life built on quarterly earnings and iron discipline. His world was precise, predictable, until the day he stepped out of his Blacktown car onto the icy pavement near Northwestern Memorial Hospital and saw a barefoot little girl clutching a baby. That single image shattered everything. The city pulsed around them, horns blaring, steam rising from subway grates, people rushing by without a glance. But Arthur's gaze locked on the girl's pale feet pressing into the snow. She sat perfectly still at the base of the hospital steps, blonde hair tangled across her eyes, her arms wrapped around a tiny baby bundled in a thin pink blanket. The baby's face peeked out just enough to show colorless cheeks, lips barely moving with each shallow breath. The girl wasn't crying. She wasn't calling for help. She simply held on with a ferocity Arthur had never witnessed. It was as if the entire world had shrunk to just the two of them, and inexplicably him. His phone buzzed with reminders, a $200 million merger, a critical call with investors, a flight to San Francisco. But for the first time in 20 years, he didn't answer. He didn't move. He didn't even remember how to breathe. He stood there as snowflakes gathered in his neatly combed hair and stared into the eyes of a child who looked as if she'd carried the weight of a lifetime. His heart, a thing he believed had calcified long ago, spasmed inside his chest. He crouched beside her, careful not to scare her, his voice low and trembling. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The girl didn't flinch. She raised tired, glassy eyes to his. "Mommy's sleeping and won't wake up," she whispered, her voice breaking like a brittle twig. "I need to feed my sister before she gets cold." Arthur's breath caught. That sentence hit him harder than any corporate betrayal or market crash. His mind reeled, trying to process how this fragile child had ended up alone in a city known for swallowing the vulnerable. Memories he'd buried decades ago surged up, memories of his little brother also left alone one winter night, a night Arthur never forgot, no matter how many zeros appeared on his bank statements. He remembered sitting in a CPS waiting room as a child, cold and terrified, hoping someone would come back. No one did. His brother died of pneumonia days later in an overcrowded foster facility. Arthur had spent his entire adult life outrunning that moment, building a fortress of money and success to never feel that helplessness again. But staring at this girl, it all came flooding back. Cars splashed through slush nearby. A businessman in an expensive coat stepped around them with a look of annoyance. A security guard at the hospital entrance shifted uneasily, but said nothing. The world kept turning indifferent. Arthur realized with a jolt of horror that he had once been exactly like those people, so focused on his own destination, he stepped over lives unraveling at his feet. He swallowed hard and offered his hand, his voice trembling. "What's your name?" She hesitated as if deciding whether to trust him. "Emma," she finally said. "This is Daisy." Arthur nodded, committing the names to memory like they were the most important entries on his calendar. He reached into his pocket for his phone, but not to call his assistant or investors. Instead, he dialed his private driver. "Cancel my day," he said quietly. "I have something more important." Emma's eyes darted between his face and his hand. The question in them was painfully clear. Could she trust him? Would he just take Daisy away? Arthur softened his tone, his eyes stinging. "You can hold her the whole time," he promised. Tears pooled in her lashes, but she nodded. As he helped her to her feet, he noticed how light she was, how thin. The thought that a girl this small had protected a baby alone in winter nearly broke him. A nurse, passing by, stopped and stared. Arthur's mind screamed at him to let the system handle it, to walk away, to return to the safe, sterile life he knew. But his feet wouldn't move. His heart wouldn't let him. And deep down he understood why, because he knew exactly how it felt to wait for someone who never came. This moment, as ordinary and unremarkable to everyone else as a snowflake landing on concrete, was the crack in his fortress. It was the point he would look back on for the rest of his life and know that everything changed. For Emma, for Daisy, and for himself. Because sometimes one small moment can turn a life built on control into a life built on meaning. And as Arthur Sinclair stepped forward into the hospital's warm light with Emma by his side, he wasn't just entering a building. He was stepping into a choice that would define him forever. Now that you know how his world fell apart in a single silent moment, what happened next will make your heart race even faster and your tears fall harder. Because Emma's fight was only just beginning. The lobby of Northwestern Memorial Hospital felt cavernous and cold, but Arthur Sinclair kept his hand resting gently on Emma's small shoulder as they made their way past the reception desk. He knew the sterile lights, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the impersonal hum of voices would terrify a child who'd already been failed by everyone meant to protect her. He guided her to a secluded waiting area, away from the noise, where the chairs looked like they'd never been used. Emma settled into one, her arms wrapped around Daisy like she might disappear if she loosened her grip for even a moment. Arthur watched her with a mixture of awe and heartbreak. Her eyes were wide, scanning every shadow, every nurse passing by, every flicker of movement, as if expecting someone to swoop in and take Daisy away. He knew that kind of fear. He'd felt it once, sitting in an orphanage after his brother died, praying for someone to show up. Seeing it in Emma, now magnified by her desperate need to protect her sister, made his chest ache with a pain he'd long thought himself incapable of feeling. He lowered himself to her eye level, speaking softly. "Emma, can I get someone to help Daisy? She needs milk and warmth." Emma's lip trembled. "Will they take her from me?" Arthur shook his head with a promise he didn't yet know how he'd keep. "No one is taking her. I swear it." Her eyes searched his face as if trying to decide if he was like every other adult who had lied to her. She seemed to find something there she could believe in, because she finally whispered, "Okay." Arthur stood and called Nurse Carla, the only medical professional he trusted completely. Moments later, Carla arrived, her eyes widening at the sight of Emma cradling the baby. Without hesitation, she knelt beside the girl and offered a reassuring smile. "Hi, sweetheart," Carla said, her voice warm and low. "I want to help you feed your sister. You can hold her the whole time, I promise." Emma's thin arms tightened around Daisy. For a moment, she looked like she might refuse. But then Daisy stirred, letting out a soft whimper that reminded Emma why she was fighting. She gave the slightest nod. Carla worked with practiced gentleness, preparing a bottle and checking Daisy's breathing and temperature while Emma kept the baby nestled against her. Arthur stood a few feet away, his heart hammering with every sound Daisy made. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, but the quiet sigh of that tiny baby felt more important than any contract. It terrified him how deeply he already cared. As Carla helped Emma bring the bottle to Daisy's mouth, Arthur's thoughts spiraled. He couldn't comprehend how the world had let this child fall through the cracks. In one of the wealthiest cities in the country, in a country that prided itself on protecting its young, a 6-year-old had been forced to survive alone in the middle of winter. He remembered statistics he'd read: over 400,000 children in America languish in foster care every year, many suffering neglect or abuse. But Emma and Daisy weren't numbers. They were right in front of him, breathing proof of a system that too often failed the smallest, most fragile lives. The baby sucked weakly at the bottle, her eyelids fluttering. Emma let out a shaky breath, tears finally slipping down her cheeks as relief and exhaustion crashed over her. Arthur sank into the chair beside her, his voice catching. "You did something extraordinary, Emma," he said. "You kept your sister alive when no one else would." Emma shook her head fiercely. "I had to. She's all I have." Her voice was so small, so determined, it nearly broke him. Carla leaned closer. "You're the bravest girl I've ever met," she told Emma, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Emma blinked up at her, confused by the kindness. "Do you think my mommy will wake up?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Arthur and Carla exchanged a glance. "She's fighting, Emma," Arthur said honestly, "and we're going to help her fight." Emma's arms tightened again around Daisy, as if that truth gave her just enough hope to breathe. They stayed in the quiet corner for over an hour, Emma feeding Daisy with single-minded focus. Arthur realized he had never sat still for so long in his life. Every minute of his days was usually filled with meetings, decisions and numbers that made the world spin faster. But here time slowed every second, measured by the tiny sounds of Daisy swallowing, and Emma humming softly under her breath, a lullaby she must have learned from her mother. It was the most important meeting Arthur had ever attended. When the bottle was empty, Carla showed Emma how to burp Daisy, praising her every careful move. Arthur noticed the small flickers of pride in Emma's eyes as she did everything just right, like the caretaker she'd had to become far too young. It struck him that he was witnessing resilience in its purest form, a child who refused to let tragedy define her family. Arthur knew then that this wasn't just about helping Emma and Daisy survive one night. If he let them go back to the system, they might never find safety again. He had the resources, the connections, the power to give them a chance. But more than that, he felt a responsibility he couldn't shake. Emma's fight for Daisy had awakened something in him he thought he'd buried for good, the will to fight for someone else. He reached over and placed his hand over Emma's. "No matter what happens, I won't let you go through this alone," he said quietly. Tears welled in Emma's eyes again, but this time they weren't just from fear, they were from the fragile, flickering light of hope. Carla stood packing up the supplies. "Daisy needs warmth and monitoring. Let's get you both somewhere safe tonight," she said. Arthur nodded, already formulating a plan. He would move mountains if he had to. This was no longer a question of whether he should help, but how far he was willing to go to keep these girls together. And as they left the hospital under the hush of falling snow, with Arthur's mind set on doing whatever it took to protect Emma and Daisy, determined to keep them safe, and together in a world that had tried so hard to tear them apart. Arthur Sinclair's penthouse rose above Chicago like an ivory tower, a gleaming testament to success with its glass walls and polished marble floors. The view from the 60th floor was breathtaking, offering a panorama of the city lights dancing across Lake Michigan. But when Arthur carried Emma and Daisy inside that night, the silence felt cavernous, every footstep echoing in the empty halls. The pristine kitchen counters the spotless leather couches, The perfectly aligned books on the shelves, everything screamed control, but nothing felt alive. Emma's eyes darted nervously from one piece of cold modern furniture to the next. She clutched Daisy tighter, her small face pale and wary. Arthur realized with a pang that his home, a place he once took pride in, for its flawless order, looked like a museum, a place where children should tiptoe, not laugh or play. He opened the guest room door, revealing a large bed made with stiff, untouched linens. "This can be your room," he offered quietly, but Emma hovered in the doorway, her gaze bouncing between the imposing bed and the window that reflected nothing but darkness. Arthur knelt to her level, his voice soft. "You can sleep here tonight. I'll be right down the hall if you need me." Emma's lip quivered as she asked, "Is there a lock on the door?" The question cut deeper than any harsh word. He swallowed hard. "Yes," he said gently, "from the inside. Only you can lock it." She nodded slowly, stepping in with Daisy, pressed against her chest like a shield. In the kitchen, Arthur prepared warm milk, his hands unsteady. He'd never made a bottle before. The measuring felt foreign, the gentle shaking to mix formula almost ceremonial. As he walked back to the guest room, he paused outside the slightly open door. Through the crack, he saw Emma sitting cross-legged on the bed, Daisy nestled in her lap, the bottle in her hand. She was humming again that same quiet tune he'd heard in the hospital, her voice so soft he could barely catch the melody. He watched her brush Daisy's fine hair aside with careful fingers, her own hair falling into her eyes. She looked impossibly small, like a doll herself, but her eyes were fierce, full of a strength Arthur had rarely seen in any adult. It dawned on him that this child had carried more responsibility in a week than he had in a lifetime of closing deals. His penthouse, filled with luxury, was a fortress designed to keep pain out, but it had also kept love out. Emma's presence made that truth impossible to ignore. He stepped inside and placed the milk on the nightstand. Emma looked up at him, her eyes dark and searching. "You don't have any pictures," she said quietly. He followed her gaze around the room, realizing she was right. There were no photos of family, no memories captured, no signs of life beyond designer furniture and spotless surfaces. "I never thought I needed them," he admitted. Her brow furrowed and she asked almost accusingly, "Did you live here alone all the time?" He hesitated before nodding. Emma hugged Daisy closer, whispering, "It must have been so lonely." Her words hit him like a blow. He sank into the chair across the room, feeling the weight of everything he'd tried so hard not to feel. For years, he'd told himself he was content in his solitude, that success was its own kind of company. But now, watching Emma speak the truth so simply he couldn't deny it anymore. He remembered a quote he once read, "A house is made of walls and beams. A home is built with love and dreams." His penthouse had plenty of walls, but not a single dream. Emma's eyelids drooped as she fed Daisy, exhaustion pulling her down. Arthur rose and fetched a soft blanket from the linen closet, wrapping it around them both. She looked up, surprised by the gesture, and whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was so small, but it reverberated through him, shattering the walls he'd so carefully built. He dimmed the lights and watched as Emma drifted off to sleep, Daisy safe and warm in her arms. In the stillness, Arthur walked through his home, seeing it through Emma's eyes. The cold kitchen where he'd eaten meals alone, the living room where the only sounds were muted television reports, the balcony where he'd stood countless nights counting lights instead of blessings. He saw emptiness in every corner, a void he'd spent his life ignoring. His phone buzzed with a news alert, a missing child case identified as Emma Bright, warnings to the public to report any sightings. Arthur knew time was running out. He called Nurse Carla asking for guidance on how to protect the girls. She promised to come by first thing in the morning with supplies, but reminded him gently that CPS would come looking. His chest tightened. He wasn't ready to lose them. Arthur poured himself a glass of water, his reflection catching in the dark window. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man staring back. His expensive suit looked out of place. His watch felt heavy on his wrist, and his face seemed older, softer. He took the watch off, setting it on the counter. Time had always ruled him. Now it felt like time was finally asking him what he truly valued. He checked on Emma one last time, watching her chest rise and fall in sleep. Daisy nestled close. A quiet settled over the penthouse, but it wasn't the sterile silence he was used to. It felt different, like the hush of a place holding something precious. Arthur realized then that a fortress without warmth wasn't safety at all. It was a prison. And he had the power to change that. The snow outside continued to fall, muffling the city's restless energy, as Arthur sank into the chair near Emma's door, determined to keep watch. He didn't know what dawn would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. The cold penthouse he once called home would never be the same again. Morning sunlight cut across Arthur Sinclair's penthouse in harsh white lines, revealing the restless hours he'd spent awake, mind racing with fears he hadn't felt since he was a boy. Emma and Daisy still slept in the guest room, but the peace felt fragile. Arthur scrolled through news articles about Emma's disappearance. Headlines painted the situation as a dangerous mystery. Authorities warned citizens to look out for a missing 6-year-old with an infant sister. His heart twisted with the knowledge that even if he'd given them warmth for one night, the world outside was already preparing to rip them away again. He didn't have to wait long. The knock at his door came before 9 a.m., sharp and forceful. Arthur opened it to find Spencer Hale, the CPS officer, standing rigid in a dark suit. His gaze swept over Arthur with suspicion, then shifted past him, eyes narrowing, as he caught sight of toys Dana had brought, scattered across the living room floor. "We received an anonymous tip," Hale said coolly. "I understand you have Emma Bright and her sister here. You'll need to surrender them to my custody immediately." Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. "They're safe here. Emma's mother is still alive, but in a coma. I can provide for them until she recovers." Hale's eyes hardened. "That's not your decision. You are not family." The words stung more than Arthur expected. He thought of Emma's tired eyes, the way she'd asked if he'd been lonely, and he realized how desperately he wanted to be the family she needed. Emma appeared behind him, barefoot, clutching Daisy. Her face turned pale when she saw Hale. "I'm not going," she said, voice shaking but fierce. Hale stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "You don't get to choose Emma." The words echoed like gunshots in the silent apartment. Arthur put himself between them, his voice low and urgent. "This is not what's best for her. The system will swallow her up. She's been through enough." Hale's jaw tightened. "Step aside, Mr. Sinclair." A desperate hush fell over the room. Arthur looked back at Emma, who was clutching Daisy so tightly her knuckles whitened. Tears welled in her eyes. "You promised," she whispered, her voice cracking on the word. He turned back to Hale, resolve solidifying like steel in his chest. "You'll have to go through me," he said quietly. Hale's expression shifted from irritation to cold calculation. He pulled out his badge and gestured to 2 uniformed officers who stepped into the hallway. Emma's sobs broke the silence, sharp and raw. "Please don't let them take us," she cried. Arthur's mind raced. He thought of the system that had failed his own brother, the empty promises he'd heard as a child, the way no one had listened when he begged them to keep his family together. He realized he couldn't let history repeat itself. "Give me 1 hour," he said to Hale. "I'll prove I'm the best person to care for them." Hale's eyes flicked to Emma, then back to Arthur. "You have 30 minutes." As Hale retreated to the hallway, Arthur snatched up his phone. He called Dana, instructing her to gather every piece of documentation proving Emma's mother, Rebecca Bright, was alive but incapacitated. He contacted his legal team demanding immediate paperwork to petition for emergency temporary guardianship. His voice shook with urgency, but he pushed through the panic. He knew that when children fell through the cracks of the system, they were often lost forever. Emma huddled on the couch, rocking Daisy back and forth. Arthur knelt beside her, taking her free hand in his. "Emma, I'm going to fix this," he promised. She stared at him, eyes wide with terror and hope fighting for space in her tiny face. "You said no one would take her," she whispered, voice so small it broke his heart anew. "And I meant it," he replied, his voice low but fierce. Dana arrived with a folder of documents, her eyes glistening with tears when she saw Emma's panicked expression. She handed Arthur the papers and squeezed his shoulder. "Make them see the truth," she urged. Arthur carried the documents to Hale, who took them with a skeptical frown. The minutes crawled by, each second a lifetime. Finally, Hale looked up, his face unreadable. "We'll need to verify this," he said flatly. "Until then, Emma and Daisy come with us." Emma let out a wail that seemed to rip the air apart. She clung to Arthur's leg as Hale reached for her. Arthur stood protectively in front of her. "If you take them now," he said, voice vibrating with rage and desperation, "and something happens to them, I will use every resource I have to hold this entire department responsible." Hale paused. The tension in the room was electric, every breath measured. Then, as if relenting to an unspoken truth, he lowered his hand. "You have 24 hours, he said, grudgingly. "If you don't provide proof of guardianship by then, I will return with a court order." As the door closed behind Hale and the officers, Arthur sank to the floor beside Emma, wrapping his arms around her and Daisy. They all trembled in the aftermath, the weight of what had almost been lost pressing down on them. Emma's sobs quieted into soft hiccups. Arthur smoothed her hair back and kissed her forehead, the gesture unfamiliar but instinctive. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm not leaving you." This battle wasn't over, but it taught him a lesson he would never forget. Real love isn't a feeling, it's a commitment to fight, even when the odds are stacked against you. He had seen firsthand how bureaucracy could crush the innocent, how rules made to protect could also destroy. And he knew then, with unwavering certainty, that he would stop at nothing to keep Emma and Daisy safe. The snow outside had melted into puddles by the time Arthur Sinclair carried Emma and Daisy into the hospital's intensive care unit. The bright, fluorescent lights above them reflected Emma's wide, hopeful eyes as she clutched Daisy closer, her small hands shaking. They followed Nurse Carla through hushed hallways until they reached Rebecca Bright's room. Arthur paused at the doorway, watching Emma stare through the glass panel at her mother, pale and fragile against the sheets, a ventilator hissing softly by her side. Emma looked up at Arthur with a question he had no easy answer for. "Is she still fighting?" she asked, her voice trembling on the edge of tears. He nodded slowly, crouching down to her level. "She's fighting, Emma, and she knows you've kept Daisy safe." Emma bit her lip, tears gathering in her eyes. "Can she hear me?" she whispered. Carla smiled gently. "You should try, sweetheart. Even if she doesn't answer, she might hear your voice." With a courage that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 6 years, Emma stepped into the room, her small figure dwarfed by the beeping machines and towering IV stands. She pulled a chair up to the bed and climbed into it carefully, Daisy resting in her arms. Leaning close, she began to hum the same lullaby Arthur had heard her sing so many times, before, her voice quiet but steady. After a moment, she began speaking between verses, recounting every day they'd spent together since the accident, every time she'd kept Daisy warm, every fear she'd faced alone. Arthur watched from the doorway, eyes burning. He thought of how much strength it took for a child to carry hope when every adult had failed her. He thought of the countless times he'd convinced himself he was powerful because he could control numbers and negotiations, never realizing that true power was found in refusing to give up on someone you love. Slowly, Rebecca's eyelids fluttered. Her head turned a fraction, her mouth moving around a single word, Emma. The sound was ragged thin, but unmistakable. Emma gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached out to touch her mother's face. "Mommy, I'm here." She sobbed. "I kept Daisy safe. We're okay." Rebecca's hand twitched, her fingers brushing Emma's cheek. Arthur stepped back, giving them space, but his chest felt like it would burst from the sight of their reunion. Carla laid a hand on his arm. "They're a family again," she whispered. But Arthur shook his head slowly. "They are," he agreed, his voice husky, "but they need someone to fight with them." Carla squeezed his hand. "And you're already that person." Over the next few days, Arthur stayed by Emma and Daisy's side, managing conference calls from hospital hallways, ignoring disapproving looks from his board members as news of his absence spread. He didn't care anymore. The penthouse felt far away, a monument to a life he no longer wanted. His days were spent watching Emma draw pictures at Rebecca's bedside, helping Carla feed Daisy, and speaking softly to Rebecca as she slowly regained strength. He was there when Rebecca could finally open her eyes for more than a few moments, when she asked in a broken whisper what had happened, and when Emma told her the story of how she'd hidden Daisy of Arthur's promise of the nights they spent waiting for her to wake up. Rebecca cried silently, her thin hand holding Emma's, then reaching for Arthur's. "Thank you," she mouthed. He shook his head, words stuck in his throat. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline, Emma curled up next to Arthur on a worn hospital couch. "Will you still be here when we go home?" she asked, voice small but firm. He looked down at her, brushing a lock of hair from her eyes. "If you'll let me," he said quietly. Emma's eyes softened. "I want you to," she whispered. "So does Daisy." He realized then that he'd been searching for purpose in balance sheets and investor calls when the only thing that had ever mattered was right in front of him, choosing to love, to stay, to protect. His fortune, his power, all of it meant nothing if he didn't use it to keep these girls safe. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca began to recover in earnest, gaining enough strength to hold Daisy herself, to laugh softly at Emma's stories, to speak with Arthur about what would come next. Together they agreed to create a new family, one not defined by blood alone, but by the unbreakable choice to belong to each other. Arthur filed paperwork to become their legal guardian, and as Rebecca recovered, they planned a future that wouldn't leave anyone behind. The first night they all spent outside the hospital, gathered around Arthur's kitchen table with warm soup and soft music playing. The penthouse felt transformed. Emma giggled as Daisy reached for her spoon. Rebecca's tired eyes glistened with gratitude, and Arthur looked around at the laughter bouncing off once lifeless walls. He understood that a home wasn't built by architects or decorated by designers. It was created by the people who chose to fill it with love. It was a lesson he'd learned too late for his brother, but not too late for Emma and Daisy. And that night, as Emma's drawing of their new family hung proudly on his refrigerator, Arthur knew he'd finally built something worth more than any fortune. Arthur Sinclair's journey began as that of a man who measured his worth in boardroom victories and pristine spreadsheets, a man who believed his success was proof that he needed no one. But when he met a barefoot little girl named Emma, holding her baby sister Daisy in the freezing snow outside a hospital, everything changed. What started as an interruption to his perfect schedule became the moment he rediscovered his own humanity. Arthur's cold penthouse, once a fortress of isolation, slowly filled with laughter, warmth, and love as he fought to protect two children who needed him more than any shareholder ever would. He faced down a system more interested in rules than compassion, challenged his own fear of vulnerability, and found himself transformed by the simple, unwavering hope of a child. He learned that true strength isn't about shutting out pain, but about opening your heart wide enough to let others in even when it's uncomfortable or scary. And when Emma's mother, Rebecca, awoke, they built a family not out of obligation or blood, but out of the deliberate, powerful choice to stay and care for one another. In the end, Arthur discovered that a life measured by kindness and connection far outweighs one measured by profits and possessions, and he finally found the home he didn't know he'd been missing all along. The moral of Arthur's story is simple, yet profound compassion has the power to heal what success and money never could. By choosing to see others' struggles by showing patience and grace instead of judgment, we can build bridges instead of walls. Real family is not always defined by who you're born to, but by who you choose to stand beside through life's hardest moments. In our busy modern world, it's easy to overlook someone in need or rush past discomfort. But if we pause, listen, and care, we might just save a life or let someone save ours. We should remember that patience isn't weakness, and forgiveness isn't foolish. They are the quiet strengths that hold our communities together. By embracing empathy and letting go of our pride, we can create a world where no one, especially the most vulnerable, feels alone. If you found this story moving and want to support more heartwarming tales like it, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more inspiring stories in the future.